great honor to be able to introduce to you a distinguished lecturer for today. She's a true leader in the field of pediatrics and a source of inspiration to many. I think she's one of the people I can proudly say really waves the banner high for UERM. So she served as associate professor the um in pediatrics for UERM and has served as the past chair of our department and also in National Children's Hospital. She's also she was also the past president in the Philippine Pediatric Society and the Perinatal Association of the Philippines. And currently, she's actually the president of Asia Pacific Pediatric Association. So, si Doctora is really a jet setter and is really living her best life right now. So, ayun po, even beyond that, all those impressive credentials, she's actually my personal idol and one of the reasons that I also entered into this field. So, let's warmly welcome Dr. Jocelyn A. Eusebio.
Thanks. You will introduce Jack?
Ah, yes, was he, Doc? I'm just, I think, I'm not sure if she was able to come in. She
She's
said,
here.
I'm here.
She's
Good
here.
morning.
She's here.
so I would
Morning to
also like to
you.
acknowledge the presence po of our department chair po, Dr. Jacqueline Bernabe.
Good morning po. Good morning, ma'am. Thank you for sharing your time with us to teach our students. Thank you po.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Jack, and of course, Honey. Thank you so much for the very kind introduction. Okay, good morning to everyone. So it really is always an honor and a privilege for me to again share with you my passion, that is giving you an overview of the more common developmental and behavioral disorders in children. Something that I have been teaching to medical students like you for more than 20 years, I guess. Okay, so I am actually a retired mentor at UERM, but I thank our dear department chair that she still invited me to be one of your lecturers. So for this morning, I just would like to share with you the presentation. I think majority of you have already looked into the presentation because this was already sent to you, right? Am I right, guys? So I think as mentioned by Dr. Lopez, everybody should open your videos so that I can feel that you are with me in this lecture. Is that okay? All right. So as mentioned, I have two lectures with you. Part one is today, and the second part will be tomorrow. And it is entitled Developmental and Behavioral Disorders in Children. And so these are the objectives for or competencies that I would like you to be able to get at the end of these lectures. First is for you to know what exactly is developmental disorder, including its updated prevalence and classification. And of course, very basic is to have to be able to know how to get a complete history, perform a thorough physical and neurologic examination to diagnose the common developmental disorders. And I will go through discussing with you the more common developmental disorders that we see in children, of course, as a generalist with a future generalist with emphasis on the early signs. Then I will move on to discussing with you what are the appropriate interventions for each of these disorders, and to emphasize to you the need for referral or co-management with other disciplines, because we always say that the management of children with this condition is multidisciplinary. And at the end, also give you advice on how to be able to inform the family about their child's condition in an appropriate way. And so also to be able to share with them what are the available resources and or programs that are available for their children. So I just would like to make mention that through the years, for more than 2 decades now, there seemed to be a paradigm shift. In the past, whenever a mother gives birth, the very first question that is usually asked by the parent is, Doc, normal po ba ang baby ko? And of course, as a clinician, if everything is all right, normal naman po, kumpleto, walang labis, walang kulang. Oh, of course, now, Inglesero na po. Doctor, how's my baby? Mommy, so far he's doing great. In the past, whenever a child is being brought for his regular well baby or well child visit, the very first thing that parents often ask would be if the baby gained weight or increased in length, right? Doc, bumigat ba at humaba naman ang baby ko? Oo, Mami, parang hinipan ng hangin, okay? And then, right now, what are the other questions? Aside from the fact that they also would like to know about increase or gain in weight and length. Ano na po ba dapat ang nagagawa ng baby ko sa ngayon? So if you are not adept, again, and I think Dr. Lopez has emphasized this during her lecture on growth and development, that as a clinician, you should have a very good understanding and knowledge of the norms of growth and development. Otherwise, in your mind, ito ang sasabihin mo. Ang dami namang tanong ng mami na ito, right? Again, in the past or even right now, still we see a lot of children coming to us because of the common colds and fever, right? Doc, may ubot sipon at nilalagnat ang anak ko. Right now, aside from the common pediatric illnesses that we see in children, we are now having these concerns of parents like, Doc, 2 years old na po si Junjun, hindi pa nagsasalita. Nag-aalala na po kami. And so again, if you are confronted with a parent with this concern, at the back of your mind, sabihin mo na lang, naku, bakit ba hindi na lang ubot sipon ang problema ni Junjun? Okay? So yes, there is a paradigm shift because in the past, most of the time, we were dealing with medical illnesses like infectious diseases, blood disorders and malignancies, as well as immunologic diseases. We are still seeing these conditions, but at the same time, we are getting more and more patients with developmental and behavioral disorders, learning difficulties, as well as family difficulties. In fact, during the 1990s, developmental disorders in children are considered the newest morbidity in pediatrics. And this is also shown in this global chronic disease burden for the last 10 years from 1990 to 2020. And this is telling us the disease group in developing countries during the 1990s versus the 2020s. And you see the increased rise of non-communicable conditions, as well as neuropsychiatric disorders in the 20th century. So Is there really a paradigm shift? Yes, it is valid. The question, however, is why? Why the rapidly increasing prevalence? I think we are all aware of the fact that with advancing technology and, of course, health initiatives like immunization programs, hygiene practices, as well as societal changes like parents being OFWs, working parents, and so on, there are more and more of our infectious diseases conditions that have decreased because of advancing technology, decreased mortality of the so-called high-risk infants, because we know that these high-risk infants are at increased risk of developing a developmental and behavioral disorder. So the paradigm shift is brought about by advancing technology and societal changes. So what is the definition of a developmental disorder? It is actually a subset of conditions that emerge during the early developmental years. And when we speak of early developmental years, it spans from birth up to the age of 18, but more so during the critical periods of brain development, which is during the first 5 years of life. So developmental disorders involve dissociation, delay, or deviance in the expected development to be attained in a given age level or states. And I will be giving you a more concrete definition of these three: dissociation, delay, or deviance later on. So in these disorders, the deficits often manifest as difficulties in the acquisition and impaired functioning in motor, sensory, cognitive, language, and or social abilities. So much so that such deficits would result to challenges in their day-to-day learning and participation. And these impairments, as I have mentioned earlier, usually originate before age 18, and most of the time, they are lifelong. In 1988, Shapiro has classified developmental disorders to as follows. And I still believe that this classification still holds true. First is that we have disorders which primarily manifest as a motor handicap, and that this is best exemplified by cerebral palsy. Then we have disorders which manifest primarily as a cognitive handicap. And the best example of this is intellectual disability or mental retardation, which is the previous term for ID. Then you have disorders with specific deficits in processing, and these are grouped into two. You have peripheral processing disorders, under which you have your visual and hearing impairments. And then you have your central processing disorders, wherein you have your autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and learning disability. In the DSM-5 TR, there are further, or this is the new category or classification. You have intellectual disability, again, formerly known as mental retardation, motor disorder, autism spectrum disorder, communication disorder, specific learning disorder, that is now the term for learning disability, and then attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It is estimated that around 317 million children and adolescents worldwide have developmental disabilities. in the United States, the prevalence has increased remarkably for children aged 3 to 17 years old from 7.4 to 8.56% from 2019 to 2021. And as far as intellectual disability is concerned, the prevalence is 1.85%, that is in the US. And for autism spectrum disorder, 1 in 36 children. When I was just in training in the 1990s, exact, that's how old I am. Autism was 5 per 10,000. So you see how it has changed remarkably during the years. The prevalence of any developmental disorder is almost 20%. And if you look at the different disorders, is still number 1 in the list is attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, followed by anxiety disorder, which is basically psychiatric in nature. And you also have learning disabilities and, of course, autism spectrum disorder. What about in our country? It is sad to note that we do not really have a study or what you call an accurate prevalence of developmental disorders in our country. But way back in 2010, wherein the census or total population is 921 million, it was estimated that 16 per 1,000 or 1.44 million or 1.57% of the total population of our country has developmental disorders. And take note that around 26% of this belong to the aged 0 to 19 years. Now, we have 5 training institutions for fellowship in developmental and behavioral pediatrics. We have PGH, Philippine Children's Medical Center, the Medical City. We also have De La Salle, and of course, National Children's Hospital. If you take a look at the statistics of these 5 training institutions, you also notice the increase in the number of developmental disorders that are being seen from 2015 to 2019, with a slight decline in 2020 because of the pandemic. Moreover, among 26,757 patients that were seen in these 5 training hospitals, number 1 in the list is autism spectrum disorder, followed by intellectual disability and infant at risk. Then you have global developmental delay, cerebral palsy, and ADHD. So those are the top 5 developmental disorders that are being seen in our country. And as to the percentage of ASDs that are being seen in one of the tertiary government hospitals, and of course that is NCH, because that is where I belong, I used to be, in 2023, it has remarkably doubled to around 65% in terms of percentage as compared to the other disorders. So when a parent is concerned about the development of his child, take note that the concerns would vary across the different age groups. In a newborn, the very first thing that you or as a parent would be concerned with would be, are there dysmorphic features, right? Does my child look different from me or from the father? Next, Is my child or is my baby undergoing medical problems? Like, for instance, sepsis, seizures, metabolic, name it. So, a parent at this age or period would be concerned about the fact that if my baby has these conditions, he is now considered to be high risk, and therefore he is more likely to have a developmental problem later on in life. During the infancy period, which leads me to asking you, Castaño, can you open your Castaño Colleen? Infancy is defined as the first.
Hello.
Colleen, what is the inclusive age for infancy? You learned that in growth and development, right? All right, magtibay, Christiel.
Good morning po, Doc.
Good morning.
I think based from our lecture before, the age for infancy is from birth up to 1 year old po.
It is from 0 to 2 years. Okay, although in some books, the 1 to 2 years is now considered to be the toddler. So the classification varies, but it is basically the first 2 years of life when we talk about infancy. So during the first year of life, the main concern of parents is centered on gross motor skills. So much so that if they come to us, one of the most pressing concerns is a delay in the development of their child in terms of motor skills, whether it be in the area of head control, sitting alone, standing alone, or even walking. But most of the time in the area of walking, okay? Which is under motor skills. Now, preschool age. And so, Dan, Ira King Tuatis, what is the definition of preschool age? What is the inclusive age for preschool? This is just a review, guys, so that everybody should be more awake. Okay, come on now.
Hello po, Doc.
So, what is preschool age? What is the inclusive age?
Is it 3 to 5 years old po, Doc?
Is Dr. Lopez listening? Is it 3 to 5 years? Do you agree, Isabella Dicena?
Yes po, Doc.
Really? Castillo, Angelo.
Doc?
Yes?
Yes po. It's usually around 3 to 5 years old po yung preschool age po.
So that is usually 2 to 6 years, okay? And the main concern of parents at this point is centered on language. This is the time that we see children who are being brought to us mainly because of language delay. And during school age, the main concern of parents is centered on what? School performance, right? As well as the behavior of their child. So this is the time that we notice or we have children with possible intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, as well as attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, which is the most common behavioral concern during this period. Now, you always have to remember that we, as primary care clinicians, have that very big responsibility to be able to recognize early if there is a problem in the development of children. And it is usually the failure of the child to attain developmental milestones at the expected ages that is the most frequent complaint of parents. So it all boils down again to knowing what the norms are across the different domains of development. Okay? The problem, though, and the challenge is that the detection rates of developmental disorders, even up to now, is very low, even lower than their actual prevalence. And why is this so? Another thing is that it is sad to note that children with problems like this are not identified early in life. In fact, 70% of them are often not identified until they get into formal schooling, and that is late already. So, the challenges for early identification of children with these disorders through the years still have not been overcome. And why is that so? This may be due to these primary barriers. One is time. If you are a clinician, a primary care doctor, and you have a lengthy line of patients queuing for you to see them, do you think you will spend more than 5 minutes just, talking about or inquiring or asking or observing the child regarding his development? I'm sure you're not going to do that, right? Number two is the cost. And I'm sure you have heard now of developmental screening that is being conducted in several centers or with several physicians. And the cost for screening is a little bit higher than the usual consultation fee. And third, practice management constraints. If you are a primary care clinician and you have not also undergone training in developmental screening, you will not be confident enough to do screening because you're not adept in using a validated screening tool. I just would like to emphasize, though, that early identification of these disorders is critical to the well-being of children and their families, as this would lead to further evaluation, diagnosis, and treatment. And therefore, it should be an integral part of the so-called primary care medical home, and it is the responsibility of all who take care of children. So how do we go about in doing a neurodevelopmental evaluation? We always go back to the basic. First and foremost is to get a complete and detailed history. And you know that in pediatrics, we always begin with maternal, birth, and postnatal history. Why is that so? Because there are several factors during pregnancy, at birth, and after birth that may be causative or contributory factors in having a disorder. Next is developmental history. That's why in pediatrics, we always tell you that you have to know the essential milestones of development across the different domains of development. Because, for instance, if a mother comes to you with a child who is 2 years old, and the mother would say, well, doc, I think my child is delayed because at his current age, he is talking in single words. What would be your answer for that, Alisa? Kokia?
Doc, sorry po. Pwede pong ulit po ulit. Nag-choppy po yung slide.
Okay. A mother bringing to your clinic a 2-year-old child, and she's concerned about the language of her child because currently she's talking in single words. And her question is my child delayed in her language, doc? What's your answer?
If in single words po, Doc, I think considering that the age is still less than 2, I think
said
it's still normal pa po, Doc.
Do you
For
agree, Danica Yambao? Do you agree? Do you agree with what was mentioned? So this is just a review, guys, of essential milestones in child development. Come on now, Danica Yambao.
Yes po, Doc.
Really? Talaga lang Dr. Lopez, are you around? Kayo talaga, ano ba yan? Okay. Joanne Constantino, give me a rundown of the essential milestones of development. Come on. Single words? At what? 10 words? Anybody, guys?
Doc.
You
Hello.
can raise your hand if you know that. Okay, go ahead, Ihan. I'm
Good morning
listening.
po, Doc. From what I remember, sorry for my voice po.
Mm-hmm.
A bit, but from what I remember po, from last year, we were taught, and also from Nelson's, kapag 2 years old po or 24 months,
In English, Ihan, in English.
the child should have at least is able to say 2-word phrases. So for example, mama come or want milk. And also the vocabulary should at least be 50 or more words, if I remember it right. And the
Okay,
speakers,
very good. Very good. All right. It is as simple as this. Single words, right? At the age of 1 year, there should be 3 words other than mama and dada. And when you say mama or dada, this should be specific to mommy and daddy already, right? At 18 months, there should be at least 10 words with meaning. And at 2.5, the child should be combining 2, 3 words to form short phrases. Like mommy give, let's go, right? And at 3 years old, a child should be able to talk in simple sentences, can tell his name, whether he's a girl or a boy, and how old he is. So as far as language is concerned, those are the essential milestones that you need to remember. So that when a mother brings to you her child and she would be asking you, it's so easy for you to say, yeah, I think mommy, he is behind. All right? I hope that is very clear with you. And that's the reason why you have to go back and get an accurate developmental history, because this is one way of dating back as to when the developmental delay initially was recognized by the parent, or was the developmental delay from the very beginning, or it just so happened recently because of a serious illness, and so on and so on, okay? Then you have family history. Why is it important that we have to dig deeper into the family history? Because there are developmental disorders that are strongly hereditary. Can you give one example, Alonso Arcega, of a developmental disorder which is strongly hereditary? Arcega, can you hear me?
Yes po, Doc.
Yes?
Pwede pong strongly hereditary
In
yung...
English, always answer in English, all right?
Okay, so
Practice.
for example, autism spectrum disorder.
Really? Is it strongly hereditary?
I think so po.
Where did you get that? Where did you get that? Huh? Have they proven that it is strongly hereditary? We are seeing a lot of patients with ASD without even a family history. Any other intelligent guess? Carry on. Raid Shenda. Come on, guys. Any developmental disorder, you know that is strongly hereditary?
Doc, ADHD.
Very good. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is strongly hereditary. Okay? And then you have to look into the social history, taking into account protective and risk factors in the environment. So what are you seeing in this picture? This is obviously a premature baby, right? And not only a premature baby at that, but has also comorbid conditions, maybe a respiratory distress syndrome due to the prematurity, a hyaline membrane disease. There may be accompanying neonatal infections, even metabolic problems at that. So when this baby survives and gets discharged, this baby is considered to be a high-risk infant, meaning to say that he is at increased risk of developing a developmental and or a behavioral disorder later in life. And therefore, this child would warrant a very close monitoring, not only of his growth, but also of his development. I have mentioned to you about developmental history. You're familiar with the different domains of development, right? Gross motor, fine motor, language, which consists of both receptive and expressive. And of course, you have your personal social, which includes self-help skills, as well as the ability of the child to relate to other people in his environment and even to himself, okay? And always remember the different principles of development. Gracial Ruth, as you are seeing these slides, Buenaventura, what do you understand by the cephalo-caudal direction of development? Did you get my question? Gracial Ruth Buenaventura? Iha, can you hear me? Hello? Okay, what about you, Luella Cueva? What do you understand by the cephalo-caudal pattern of development? And can you give me a concrete example, which I think you can see in this slide?
Hello, Doc. So,
Yeah.
for the cephalocaudal pattern of motor development, it means that the motor skills of the child develops first. You can observe it first at the more cephalic parts of the body. So, for example, you can notice movements of the neck and then the trunk and then the legs.
And that means that it proceeds from head
the head.
control to sitting to standing. All right. So it is from head to foot. That's the cephalo-caudal pattern of motor development. And this holds true as far as gross motor skills are concerned. Okay. And this is what I was saying earlier on, that there is an influence or a contribution of genetics as far as developmental and behavioral disorders in children are concerned. And this is best exemplified by attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And these are the social determinants of health. That's why in the social history, you have to dig deeper into the risk factors as well as protective factors. A very good example is, what are the protective factors in this family? You have a caring, a nurturing, and a stimulating environment, and definitely the development of the child will be more or less optimized, okay, despite problems during the perinatal period. After doing a complete history, then you have to proceed on performing a thorough physical, and neurological examination. You're all familiar with the anthropometric measurements, right? And Matienzo, L. John Paulo. Can you give me the three most important anthropometric measurements?
Hi, Doc. I think it's the head circumference, chest circumference, and
Are you sure?
um height.
Again.
Height. No. Weight po, and
And
then
then?
height, and then head circumference.
All right, you have three, right? Weight, length or height, and the head circumference. Why is it important to take the head circumference? And what ages do you need to get it? Fatima Burahim. Can you hear me? Why is it important to get the head circumference?
Good morning po. So it's important to get the head circumference po to assess the brain growth development of the baby. That's for the age po, 0 to 2 years old po.
Okay, very good. So, the head circumference, I think, has been emphasized to you, is a reflection of brain growth. Okay? So much so that during the first year of life, what is the average increase in head circumference? Ryle, you? What is the average increase in head circumference during the first year of life? You know that? Huh?
Doc, 10 cm po.
Again?
10 cm.
10 centimeters. So much so that if you are born with a head circumference of 35 centimeters, on the first year of life, it should be around 45. Okay, next is to check on dysmorphic features. And I have already emphasized this, that when a child is born, does he have dysmorphic features? As you can see in here, you have a child with Down syndrome. You notice that the facial features are like this, okay? Or if you have a Turner syndrome, wherein even if the child is already an adolescent, you have an infantile genitalia and even that of the breast, okay? And next would be to check for hard as well as soft neurologic signs. Daniela Patajo, what do you understand by hard and soft neurologic signs? And can you give me an example of how to elicit these ones?
For hard neurologic signs po, these are the ones that we can, I think, we can measure through neurologic exams like Babinski, I think, Doc. And then for soft neurologic signs naman po, I'm not quite sure about soft neurologic signs po, Doc.
Anyone who knows how to elicit a soft neurologic sign? Marian Teresa Ramos. So the hard neurologic signs are grossly, you can already see, right? Like weakness on one of the lower extremities or spasticity on one of the extremities. Those are hard. Grossly, you can already see. But soft neurologic signs you need to test, like as simple as eye and hand coordination, right? Or even simply asking where your right hand, where your left hand is, and right-left orientation should be normally present at least at 5 years old and beyond. Why do we need to test the soft neurologic signs? Because studies have shown that if there is the presence of this early on in life, it can be an early manifestation or it is a precursor for a learning disability later on in life, okay? Then you need to do developmental screening, and I think this has been emphasized very well during your lecture on growth and development, right? and that you have several developmental screening tools. You have seen this. This is Denver, but it's not being recommended much because of the problem in the language domain. But what is the most acceptable worldwide is the PEDS, or Parents Evaluation of Developmental Status, which is for children from 0 to 8 years, and it basically consists of parental questionnaires that the parents have to fill up while they are queuing for their child to be seen by the clinician. And of course, if there is a need to do laboratory investigation, take for instance, you are highly suspecting that this child has hypothyroidism, then of course, right now, we are doing a newborn screening, and therefore there are more and more of them who are actually being identified early on in life. But if this is a child who did not undergo newborn screening, you see the child to have the features of short stature and even developmental delay, then foremost in your mind would be, am I dealing with a child with a hypothyroidism, and therefore thyroid function test should be done. If a child presents with features of Down syndrome, then you need to do a karyotyping or a chromosomal analysis, because again, you need to confirm the diagnosis of a possible Down syndrome, because it helps you a lot in prognosticating as well as in counseling the parents about the child's condition. So let's just go back to the very basic of how to be able to detect if a child has developmental delays. You're all familiar with this. This was given to you as a lecture in second year. Am I right? Alisa Escolano? Am I right about this? Surveillance and
Yes po,
screening.
Doc.
All right. Can you just therefore give me a very concrete example how to differentiate surveillance from screening? How does one differ from the other? Come on, you said yes. Huh?
For surveillance, it's usually how we monitor outpatients visiting. It's for every health visit. It's like that. For screening, it's really a test we do on purpose to find out if they are following the milestones, Doc.
Okay, so surveillance, as you have mentioned, is really a part of the day-to-day encounter with parents of children, right? So it's basically getting a good history, right? And going through, observing the child, and so on. In fact, there are 6 components of developmental surveillance. So it is defined as the process of recognizing children who may be at risk of developmental delays. So once you did a surveillance and you were able to find out that this child is at risk, you need to validate that by doing a screening to identify and refine that recognized risk. Take note that surveillance and screening are done by a primary care clinician. And based on the screening, if this child would warrant further assessment, then a developmental evaluation is in order. So this is a complex process that is aimed at identifying specific developmental disorders that are affecting a child. And this is now done by a developmental pediatrician like us, okay? So as mentioned, for primary care clinicians, you need to do surveillance and screening. And we have actually an algorithm on how to go about in doing surveillance and screening. And this is seen in your textbook of pediatrics by Nelson's, right? And this is being recommended because of the fact that there are more and more children now having developmental and behavioral problems. So take note that developmental screening surveillance program, aside from treating the child or just doing well baby clinic on a child, giving immunization, talking about his health and nutrition, as well as safety. So, developmental screening should really form part of the routine well baby and child visit, and it is recommended for all children. But if you are not able to do that, at the very least, do that at 9 months, 18 months, or 30 months, then yearly thereafter until the child reaches the age of 7. They removed the 24 months in here that was present before because aside from doing the developmental screening, which is the PEDS or any developmental screening tool, it is also recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics that you have to do the screening tool for autism, which is the MCHAT at 18 and 24 months, okay? The Philippine Pediatric Society in its Preventive Pediatric Healthcare Handbook also is recommending surveillance, as you can see in here, just like that of the Bright Futures by the American Academy of Pediatrics. So developmental screening is very important because there are several patterns of abnormalities that are identified with developmental screening. One is delay, and in fact, this is the most common reason for referral. It can just be a motor delay, a language or speech delay, or a delay in 2 or more areas of development. Then you have dissociation, wherein one phase of development is out of synchrony with the other areas. Examples of these are cerebral palsy, wherein the motor skills are significantly lagging behind, but the other areas can be more or less at par, like in the spastic diplegic type, the IQ can be normal or the cognitive skills. Another thing is learning disability, wherein you notice that the child is very good in math, but is very poor in reading and spelling. Then you have deviance, which refers to non-sequential development. You have heard of parents telling you that my child was able to say mama, dada when he was 1 year old, but it got lost, or now it is replaced by colors, letters, numbers, and so on. That is deviancy. And this is best exemplified by autism spectrum disorder, right? And then, of course, regression, wherein there is a loss of previously acquired skills. Again, this is best exemplified by autism. Okay, so developmental screening provides clues to the early diagnosis of developmental disorders. Why are we so particular about early identification or recognition? You're all familiar with the theory of brain plasticity. Enrique, what do you understand by that theory of brain plasticity?
Doc, brain plasticity po occurs during the first 6 years of life po.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
kapag na-injure po yung brain,
in English, please.
if there is an injury in the brain, with proper intervention and stimulation po, intact areas po, pwedeng we can create new connections po to compensate po for the damage of the brain po.
All right, very good. So the brain is malleable or plastic during the first 5 to 6 years of life, so much so that even if there are injuries or damage to the developing brain, if proper stimulation will be done, right? Those parts of the brain that are still intact, they are capable of forming new connections to compensate for the damaged parts. And that is what we mean by brain plasticity, but there is a window of opportunity. And therefore, if you really want to intervene, it should be during this window of opportunity. The other thing why you need to do early recognition is to be able to prevent secondary dysfunction or complications. And this is best exemplified by with cerebral palsy, wherein if the child undergoes physical therapy, there is less chance of him having contracture deformities, which is a secondary dysfunction or complication. So when a child comes to us with a developmental delay, actually, as mentioned earlier, that is the most common chief complaint of parents with developmental disorders. And therefore, again, as a clinician, we will be able to know that a child is delayed because we know what is expected for his particular age. So much so that the further away the child is from what is considered to be average or normal, then the more likely he is to be delayed or not developing normally. Well, developmental milestones are very important because these are markers of a child's development from infancy to childhood, and these are being used in developmental monitoring and surveillance. It helps us to know or determine if a child is undergoing a typical development or has delayed in a given or over multiple areas. But take note that developmental milestones are not really standardized and can detect less than 30% of developmental and behavioral conditions. This is actually the update on developmental milestones, and these are evidence-based. Originally, we say that a child is developing at par if his skills are that of 50% of most children in what he can do for a particular age. However, recently, it has been said that you consider the child to be at par if his milestones are included at the age most more than or equal to 75% of children are expected to demonstrate. So tumaas na. It has increased, okay? And by doing so, this would eliminate the warning signs and discourage the wait and see attitude and or approach of parents as well as practitioners. It is estimated that about 317 million children have one or more mental or behavioral problems. This is the most updated that we can see based on the WHO in 2019. And that is why early detection is important for early intervention so as to maximize or optimize the developmental potential of a child. We know that these disorders are lifelong, but we know also that we can do something to optimize and make them functional as an individual in the society. So that is the end of part 1. You need a 2-minute break? Go ahead. Okay? Okay, I have a 2-minute break. Can you see what I'm sharing?
Yes po, Doc.
Yes po, Doc.
Okay, all right. 1 minute more break. All right, guys, can you hear me?
Yes po.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to motor delay. And as I have mentioned earlier, the most common developmental concern of parents during the infancy period is motor delay. So just a brief review. The age range for independent walking is very wide. It is from 9 to 17 months, the mean age of which is 12 months, and the critical period is 18 months. So much so that if you have a full-term baby, at the age of this 9 to 17 months, he should be able to walk. But when he reaches the age of 18 months and he still is not able to walk, then that is considered to be a delay in walking. Okay? So motor delay is actually a common presentation for children with developmental disorders. And in fact, it is considered to be the sine qua non for the diagnosis of cerebral palsy. It is defined as motor quotient of 50 or below. So what are the most common causes of motor delay in children? Foremost is cerebral palsy, with an incidence of 1.5 to 4 per 1,000, followed by muscular dystrophy and then spina bifida. So this is a clinical approach to motor delay. As mentioned, the motor quotient should be below 70, and you are categorized to have mild or moderate to severe motor delay based on the motor quotient. You also have this algorithm on how to be able to identify children with motor delays based on the American Academy of Pediatrics. So it is basically following the developmental surveillance and screening algorithm that is given to us by the AAP. So what is the definition of CP? I got this from Nelson's because it is still is your Bible for pediatrics, right? But to simply is an abnormality of it, and that the cerebral pathology is static and that the injury happened during the developmental period. So that should be very clear, okay? It is said to be the most common and costly form of a chronic disability that begins in childhood with an incidence of 2.6 to 2.9 per 1,000 children. This was adopted again or gotten from Nelson's. The prevalence in males is higher than that of the females of around 30 to 40%, and also is higher in low birth weight or preterm infants. There is no definite cause of CP, just like any of the developmental disorders. That is the sad thing. We really don't know what is the exact cause. But there can be what we call contributory factors. Take, for instance, we have now the classification of CP as congenital, acquired, or cryptogenic. This is also in your textbook of Pediatrics, Nelson's. You can read on this. The congenital CP is the most common, which consists of about 85 to 90% of all the total cases of CP. And this may be brought about by cerebral injury or maldevelopment, which happened before or during birth. Okay? For premature infants, the major lesions that contribute to CP are intracerebral hemorrhages and periventricular leukomalacia or PVL. And for term infants, risk factors include eclampsia, hypercoagulability, and placental pathology. And HIE, which used to be the most common cause of CP, especially among full-term infants, is now a decreasing cause of cerebral palsy. And this is brought about by advancing technology, okay? And CP can be classified according to the muscle tone or the region of involvement in the brain, as well as the functional classification or severity of the problem. So according to muscle tone, you are familiar with spastic, dyskinetic, and ataxic. And still, the most common type of CP is your spastic type of CP. And these are further grouped or classified as quadriplegic if 4 of the extremities are involved, diplegic, 4 extremities are involved, but more involvement of the lower than the upper extremities. And then you have the hemiplegic, wherein only half of the body is affected. All right, I have already mentioned about this. Okay. And you can also see this classification of CP again in Nelson's. And I want you to read on this. So as you can see, the most common here is the spastic diplegic type. About 35% is the pathology in the brain. And what are the possible causes, right? Then this is followed by the hemiplegic type and then the spastic quadriplegic type. So anybody can explain to me how would you differentiate spasticity from rigidity? Angelo, Adriano Castillo. Make sure to open your videos.
How to differentiate spasticity to ano po daw?
From rigidity. How would you elicit that? I mean, and when you elicit that, how will you differentiate that this is spasticity and not rigidity or vice versa?
Sa
Okay, go
spasticity
ahead.
po kasi sa spasticity po kasi Doc,
In English, please.
when trying to differentiate spasticity and rigidity po, spasticity po kasi there is increase in muscle tone po. And it can be observed po in rapid movements po. It can be seen in the limbs po, yun po. There's increased muscle tone and spasticity. And rigidity po, when we're testing it during neurologic exam, it is more of the resistance po of the specific muscle group po to a force applied. So that's how we can observe po rigidity naman in a neurologic exam if there is resistance po of a force applied, and in spasticity there's increased muscle tone po.
So
That's
are you saying that there is no resistance in spasticity? Salvador
um
Russell Joshua, can you comment on what your classmate said? Do you agree with him?
For spasticity, doc, I think that's initially there's a resistance and then it will become loose, just like a clasp knife. So initially, if you pull the,
Can you
if you test
not
it,
see this, that there is increase, right? With increasing speed, right? So when you apply, like for instance, you have this patient's hand like that, right? And then you do a flexion and extension of that. There is the resistance to externally imposed movement increases with increasing speed and varies with the direction of movement. In other words, that's why you call it clasp knife, right? In rigidity, the tone remains the same. Is that clear? So that is how you differentiate spasticity from rigidity, okay? So as mentioned, you have the different types of spastic. CP, the diplegic, is the most common, wherein the lower extremities are more involved than the upper extremities. There usually is an accompanying strabismus. Seizure is normally not present, and intellectual disability is only present in about 35% of cases. And the cerebral pathology usually is periventricular leukomalacia. As mentioned here, this is visualized on MRI in more than 70% of cases. So this premature baby is at increased risk of developing a spastic diplegic type of CP. And this is the cerebral pathology in spastic diplegic type of CP. Okay? Now, why is it that the cognitive skills are usually not affected in spastic diplegic type? Because in periventricular leukomalacia, first, it is predominantly a matter injury with relative gray matter sparing. Okay? Now, what about in the spastic quadriplegic type? All the extremities are affected. And in here, there is a very high incidence of comorbidities and even sensory impairments like blindness or visual and hearing impairments, very high incidence of seizures, as well as intellectual disability. So it is the most severe form of CP because of the marked motor impairment of all extremities and the comorbidities or associations or associated complications that I have mentioned. Okay? And most of the time, this can be brought about by hypoxia, infection, and even also HIE. But as previously mentioned, HIE now is becoming less of a cause of CP. Obviously, this is a spastic quadriplegic type of CP. You notice the scissoring of the lower extremities brought about by spasticity. You have the persistent grasp reflex, which normally should be not present at this particular age. You notice the strabismus there. All right, this is actually a patient with spastic quadriplegic type of CP. You see the strabismus there? And he already has actually contracture deformities, okay? And in the spastic hemiplegic type, as mentioned, only one side of the body is affected. Seizure may or may not be present. intellectual disability may or may not be present. Okay? Then it has been mentioned that the common pathology in this type of CP is a middle cerebral artery infarction, especially happening during the late third trimester or perinatally. Then we move on to the extrapyramidal types of CP, which include your athetoid, your dystonic, and your ataxic type. So under extrapyramidal, you have two main types of involuntary movements. You have your ataxia and your dyskinesias. Under extrapyramidal, the injury is outside the pyramidal tract, and therefore this is in the areas such as the basal ganglia, thalamus, and cerebellum. And you see a variety of abnormal motor patterns and postures. We call them snake-like movements. Okay, then in the ataxic type, of course, it involves the cerebellum, and you will notice the ataxic gait. The ataxic CP is considered to be the rarest form of CP. Under the dyskinetic type of CP, you have the athetoid and the dystonia. And this athetoid CP is mostly associated with asphyxia and kernicterus. You've heard of kernicterus, right? Wherein the child develop hyperbilirubinemia, which requires even blood exchange, which would require oftentimes not only exposure to phototherapy, but also blood exchange And the affected parts of the brain are your basal ganglia and thalamus. And you notice a patient with this condition to usually exhibit the so-called athetoid or snake-like movements. And in here, you may or may not have seizures, mental retardation. And then you have the dystonic type of CP. And you also have what we call a hypotonic type of CP, wherein initially you notice them to be hypotonic, but eventually they may normalize or even progress into the spastic or athetoid type of CP. The early diagnosis of CP is difficult because of the fact that there is paucity of motor milestones during the first 6 months of life. However, in order to be able to recognize early on that this child is at risk of having a CP is number one, a very high index of suspicion, especially so if the child is born high risk, then you need to do a traditional or irregular neuro exam every time that the child is being brought for regular well baby visit. You need to assess the primitive reflexes and, of course, elicitation of postural responses. So I have mentioned Joaquin Valencia about primitive reflex, that when does it normally appear and disappear? Joaquin Valencia. Primitive reflex that you know of, when should it normally appear and disappear? Can you hear me? I can see you. Okay, and unmute
Hello po.
yourself. Yes.
Hello po. So one example of yung primitive reflex is yung
English, please.
hello po?
Speak in English, please, and answer in English.
Oh, okay. So one example of a primitive reflex is the Babinski reflex, because this would normally be present in newborns. However, it would disappear by the age of 2.
Of 2 years old? Are you saying 2 years old?
Um,
Do you agree Justin De La Paz. Do you
Hello po,
agree?
Doc.
Do you agree with what he said?
Hello po, Doc. Sorry.
Yes, I'm
Can you hear me
listening.
po?
I can hear you.
Okay po, Doc. If I remember correctly, it can be present until 2 years old po.
Everybody agrees with that? Mhm. Isn't that too late?
Could it be
Can you
until
give
1 year?
you change your mind so easily, huh? All right, anybody now? Guys, that's the reason why you need to know what are your primitive reflexes, right? How to elicit them. You should know when this should normally be present and when this should normally disappear, because one of the red flags, Luella Cueva is smiling, so maybe she knows the answer. Okay, go ahead. I can see you all, guys. Oh, yes. Luigi, I cannot see your face. Lance, Matthew, I just see your hair. Come on, guys. We're almost done. Luella, Babinski.
Sorry, Doc, what was the question po?
My question is, can you give me a primitive reflex that you know of, and that when this should normally appear and disappear? And one of your classmates made mention of Babinski. So you need to listen, because I usually ask questions, so that is the only thing for you to be able to be
Okay po.
awake. All right?
Doc, Moro reflex po, and it disappears by 3 to 6 months.
So it should be normally present at? Moro reflex should normally be present at? Guys, this is so basic. Oh. What happened? Okay, Ralph Kenneth Ramos said at birth. Michelangelo Pascual said at birth. All right, you're right, guys. Okay, so motor reflex should be normally present at birth. That's why even in the nursery, when you will get to rotate in the nursery, when you go into the clinics, you can elicit the motor reflex, and you should know how to elicit the motor reflex. All right, I'm sure Dr. Lopez has given you a picture on how to do that in your second year, okay? So it should be present at birth and normally disappears by 4 to 6 months. So much so that when it persists, it is a red flag, okay? Is that clear? And Babinski reflex, you were right that it should be normal. It should normally disappear by 1 to 2 years, but not anymore beyond that. Okay? So CP has this red flags. These are also found in your Nelsons. If there is poor head control beyond the age of 4 months, the hands not crossing or reaching out to the midline after 3 months, persistent fisting of the hands or hands beyond 6 months of age, and a definite hand dominance before the age of 18 months. So in other words, before the age of 18 months, a baby can be ambidextrous, meaning he can use either the right or the left hand. Beyond that, he will now exhibit a preponderance or dominance of one of the hands, okay? So a hypotonic infant usually assumes this kind of position, a frog leg position. And a spastic infant usually exhibits scissoring of the lower extremities and even toe walking, which is indicative of spasticity. Levin has given us this so-called poster criteria for the diagnosis of cerebral palsy. P, which stands for posturing and abnormal patterns like extensor thrusts. O for oropharyngeal problems. Take note that CP patients have problems with swallowing, with chewing, and then you have strabismus. Then T for tone, which more often than not is increased, especially in the spastic type of CP. Then E stands for evolutional responses, and these are represented by persistence of your primitive reflexes, and of course R for reflexes, which again, more often than not, are increased because that is usually what is seen in your spastic type of CP. Normally, a child in a full-term infant in a resting position should have the extremities in this manner. They are flexed. This is in contrast to what you have seen earlier, the frog leg position in a hypotonic infant. Angelo, can you describe to me what is asymmetric tonic neck reflex, when it should normally appear and or disappear? Did you get that? Did you get that?
Yes po, Doc.
It is otherwise known as the
Yung parang ano po, yung parang archer position.
Please. Again.
Hello
It
po,
is
Doc.
okay. Come on, I can hear you. It is otherwise known as the
So I can describe it po, Doc, as yung ATNR po mostly is there's extension of the other hand of the extremity, while there is in opposite flexion of the contralateral extremity po.
Yeah, what is the other term for this? Ralph Kenneth Ramos. All right, Cabral said fencing, Manuel, fencing, and Sabado, Leverisa, fencing, Tan. All right, so that's the otherwise known, and Asuncion and Garcia, otherwise known as the fencing reflex. All right, so when the head is turned to one side, the side wherein the head is turned usually will extend, while the opposite limbs would normally flex. When this should be present and normally disappear. As early as 2 weeks of life, and it should disappear by the age of 6 months. All right. I have been mentioning about associated handicaps in CP, right? Like seizures, intellectual disability, visual impairments, feeding problems, dental problems, speech, and neurobehavioral problems. So this can be associated with either any of the CPs, but we know that it is very common among those with the spastic quadriplegic type of CP, which is the most severe form of cerebral palsy. So as far as management is concerned, we know that CP, just like any of the disabilities, is lifelong. It is not curable, but we can improve the quality of the life of a child with CP. And this is by doing therapy. And the goal of therapy is aimed at maintaining function. That is what I have mentioned earlier, meaning preventing the occurrence of complications or secondary dysfunctions like contracture deformities, and of course, maximizing or developing new functions. So first is physical therapy, right? And this is to improve on the muscle tone, and or if this is spastic CP, initially the spasticity should decrease with physical therapy so as to be able to develop a motor strength that is not spastic. Then the physical therapy also would improve on the positioning of the child to ensure symmetry and even prevent scoliosis. So when you go to National Children's Hospital in your 4th year, you will be seeing the rehabilitation department there, wherein you see a lot of CP patients undergoing physical therapy, right? So these are all pictures from National Children's Hospital, and that is from a therapy center. And there are other ways by which we can help children with CP by making use of assistive devices and even subjecting them to surgery. You have heard about dorsal root rhizotomy and tenotomy of the Achilles tendon, all of which have its goal of reducing the spasticity in a child with CP. But more importantly, are non-motor activities, which include parental counseling and as well as school placement and providing opportunities for social interaction. Are there non-pharmacological ways of intervention? Of course, there are, and these include special education, referrals to the other subspecialists like your ophtha, ENT, even dentist, GIT, and of course the regular child visit for immunizations and so on. Is there a role of drug in CP? It has a very limited role. And the main goal for using the drug is to alter the muscle tone to prevent deformities and to improve functions. And what are the types of drugs that are being used for spasticity? I'm sure you have heard of diazepam, baclofen, dantrolene, and even Botox. Then you have second-line medications such as clonidine or gabapentin for contractures, for athetosis, and even amino acid therapy. What is the prognosis for CP? It remains guarded because, as I have mentioned, even with the most optimistic way of reporting, it has only found 60% success. And there are several factors that may influence outcome. First is the motor capability. Of course, the prognosis for a child with spastic quadriplegic type of CP is poorer than that of the other types. The more associated dysfunctions the child has, including seizures, visual and sense or hearing impairments, and even intellectual disability, would mean a poorer prognosis. Then of the availability of resources and the ability of the family to provide this and support the child would matter in influencing the outcome of children with CP. The last classification for CP is the so-called functional classification. You have level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and level 5. You can see this in your textbook. All right? So another 2-minute break. And we will talk about the last part for today's lecture, and that is on language delay. All right? Just for you to stand up and stretch. All right, let us resume so that we should be able to finish by exactly 10 a.m. Do you have a class after this, guys? Yes? Okay, I can see Justin nodding. All right. De La Paz. Okay, so the last part for this part 1 of my lecture is about language and communication disorders. And as I have mentioned, this is the most common presentation or concern of parents as far as the development of their children during the preschool age. Okay, so these are the red flags for language. And when we talk about language, more often than not, it is tantamount to talking about cognitive skills. Remember, in your lecture on growth and development, what is the most important domain of development? Do you remember, Joaquin? Valencia? What is the most significant domain? If not, I must say, important domain of development. Anyone? Jennifer Tudtud, I cannot see your face. As well as Micaela, I cannot see your face too. Okay, Jennifer, what is the most significant domain of development?
Hello po.
Yes, I'm listening.
I think, Doc, it's the language po, since it is usually correlated din po with the cognitive development po, or cognitive ability of the child po.
Very good. And Castillo Angelo answered the same. All right. So these are the red flags for language development. I will not go into details of this. These are found in your Nelsons. All right. Okay. But I think I have already, we have already gone through the essential milestones of language development. And Nelson has placed here also the criteria for referral for audiologic and speech and language evaluation. If at age 15 months, etc., 18 months, 24 months, 30 months, and 36 months. So I want you to read on this on your textbook of Pediatrics by Nelson. So language and communication disorders are very common among preschool age children. And again, as I always say, I don't know, do you believe that the males are of the weaker sex? Because it looks like that most of the delays or whatever are more common among males than females. Don't you think so, girls? Females? Okay. Now, take note that the assessment of language during the early years of life is difficult. Why is that so? Because as mentioned, during the first year of life, the main focus of parents is on the motor skills, right? Rather than on the language milestones. And not only that, when a child is brought to the Well Baby Clinic, and when the child sees you in white uniform or even in a doctor's uniform, do you think you will be able to talk to this child? No. The child is often crying most of the time because he often relates to you as the one who will give the injection, right? Therefore, it is difficult to assess language directly in the Well Baby setting. However, you always have to take note that if the parents are concerned about the development of their child, whether it be in the area of language or in any area of development, you have to lend an ear, all right? Because studies have shown that the sensitivity and specificity of parental concerns are high, ranging from 72 to 83%. So when you get into the clinics as future clinicians, if a parent is concerned, please do something about that. And I hope that I will not be able to hear from a parent that, for instance, Paulo Fabros has seen, and that the parent said, oh, according to wait till child reaches the or before grandfather is late in his language. So what about Fabros if this child is autistic? Huh? 4 or 6 years old really are too late for referral. Okay? You get what I mean? Okay, so these are again the screening tools, which are also the screening tools for any area of development, but these are basically, most of these are language specific screens. You see the here? But you also have the general screening tools. You again have the PEDS, all right? So the PEDS really is very helpful as a screening tool. In all patients presenting with language delay, the very first thing that you need to screen is the hearing, right? Because if you have screened the hearing, you can totally eliminate that as a possible cause of a speech delay. So talking about hearing impairment, the prevalence is as follows, okay? And it is defined as an unaided measured bilateral pure tone hearing loss at frequencies of 50, 1000, and 2000 hertz, averaging 40 decibels or more in the better ear on the most recent audiological evaluation, which is conducted by a qualified professional. So the hearing loss is classified, meaning the severity is defined on the basis of the following hearing loss levels. You have mild, moderate, severe, and profound. Okay? And according to AAP, there are high-risk indicators for hearing loss, especially during the first month of life. First is the family history. Have sensory neural hearing loss, which is probably congenital. You're all familiar with the torch infections? Yes or no? Right? And one of the most common is your congenital rubella syndrome. And in your congenital rubella syndrome, aside from retardation or delay, you have also cataract, right? You can also have sensory neural hearing loss and cardiovascular abnormalities. Hyperbilirubinemia at levels requiring exchange transfusion, birth weight, meaning very low birth weight infants, bacterial meningitis, specifically your H influenza meningitis, the incidence of sensory neural hearing loss is about 30%, asphyxia, respiratory distress, prolonged mechanical ventilation, and ototoxic medications like your aminoglycosides, which are often used for children with neonatal sepsis, and of course, physical features that are associated with a well-known syndrome. Then, beyond the age of 1 month, these are the other high-risk indicators for hearing loss. The mean age for the identification. Sorry, the guard is passing by. Okay, the mean age for mild sensory neural hearing loss is 3 to 4 years old, and for moderate to profound is 23 months. Take note that it is still very sad that the mean age for identification, even if you are dealing with a profound sensory neural hearing loss, still is late. But our children now are very lucky because the universal hearing screening or the hearing screening at birth is now a law, right? And it is being done in most patients that are born in a hospital setting. So what are the most frequent complaints of parents of children with language delay? Of course, not responding to speech or noise. There is language delay, but for the mild hearing losses, less frequent complaints like behavioral problems and balance problems are the most common presentations. So when you are presented with a child wherein you suspect language delay, you have following hearing your or auditory brainstem evoked response or ABR, ASSR, the audiometry. At birth, it is the acoustic emission that is done and tympanometry. Among these methods, the most accurate is your ABR.
Recording
okay?
stopped.
So why? Why was the recording stopped? All right, so this is your OAE. This is your ABR. It's like an EEG. And then you have here the
Recording in progress.
all right. So this is the recommendation of AAP as far as hearing screening is concerned. There should be a universal detection of hearing loss in infants before age 3 months, and that appropriate intervention should be given no later than 6 months of age. Because the very first time that the child babbles is at 6 months. Others na specific dada and mama is at 8 months, okay? So how do we manage a child with hearing loss? More often than not, they need assistive devices like hearing aids and cochlear implants. But the question that is often raised by parents is, when is the best time to give or to insert a hearing aid? From the moment that a child is diagnosed to have hearing loss. And when do you do a cochlear implant? There are absolute indications for doing a cochlear implant. Not all hearing aid patients, not all hearing loss patients with hearing loss are candidates for cochlear implants. And of course, special education as necessary. You're familiar with the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for communication disorders. You have language disorder, speech sound disorder, and social pragmatic communication disorder. So you have heard of specific language impairment, developmental language disorder, or developmental dysphagia. This is to us the late bloomer. So it is who are considered to be late bloomer. If you go back to the history, more often than just what was mentioned earlier, the father, the grandfather, I'm sorry, I got lost. I got disconnected, okay? Can you hear me now, guys?
Yes po, Doc.
Okay, so as I was telling you earlier, there is a condition wherein these children with language delay are often described as late bloomers, right? And if you go through the history, most of the family members are also delayed in their language, okay? And therefore, it is strongly genetic. So why are we so particular about these children, even if we know that they are just late bloomers? Because the studies have shown that they may be at risk for a learning difficulty later on in life. And you have heard of social pragmatic communication disorders. These are usually seen among children with ASD or autism spectrum disorder. You have heard of children who in certain situations or even with certain people do not speak at all, but their language is normal when they are at home or when they are comfortable with the people around them. And this is termed as elective or selective mutism, and it is actually a form of anxiety disorder in children. Okay? And then, so the management for these children would require speech therapy, not because they are lacking in speech. I mean, it's more of behavior therapy, I mean, for children with elective mutism. But for children with who are considered to be late bloomers, the most important thing is that you still subject them to language therapy and enroll them early in school. So this is the condition wherein early schooling is important for language and social stimulation. I think we're running out of time. I'm going to discuss about intellectual disability, autism spectrum disorder, and ADHD and LD in our next meeting. That is tomorrow, guys. Any question? Other questions from the floor? You have like, I think, 2 minutes for any question. Anyone? None? Everybody's saying none? Okay.
Doc, may I ask something po?
Anna,
Yes. When you are assessing for milestones, would you advise or do you have recommendations for taking into account the cultural effect or cultural practices? Because we were taught before that in the Philippines it is expected, or sometimes you would see that there are delays that are normalized in Filipino society because Filipino culture
it's so
does not
protective.
yeah
And
does
it's
not
doing
promote
everything for
independence.
the child. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that should not be an excuse. That's why I always tell parents, all over the world, there is an average age for toilet training. But how many of our children are still on diapers up to the age of 6 to 8 years? Yeah, that is cultural, but that is not an excuse for them not to be able to achieve the milestone. So that is the reason why you, as a clinician, should advocate and educate the parents. Okay?
Okay, thank you po.
Yeah. Do you need to get the attendance, Aldrin? Okay, put on your videos. We have to get the attendance, I guess. 1, 2, 3. I don't know how to do that. Ay, nako. Sinong marunong sa inyo? Dati marunong ako ah. It's not working. I need to stop sharing, I guess. Aldrin?
Aldrin, please take a photo.
Hi, Jack, you're still there?
Opo, ma'am. Very much po.
I think I can get na. Okay, everybody put on your 1, 2, 3. I'm on page 3. Put on your videos, guys, so that you're present. Okay. We have 8 pages. I'm number 4 now. Nice to see your faces, guys. Did you just wake up? Okay.
Okay na po, ma'am.
Wait lang. Number 6. I'm getting it also, Aldrin. And then 7. A lot in number 7 have closed videos. And the last one is number 8, closed videos also. All right. Thank you so much for your very kind attention. See you all tomorrow.